Hey everyone, this is Matt. I'm going to be talking about a opening that is fairly common among Grandmaster play. It's called the Catalan Opening. It comes mainly out of the Queen's Gambit Declined, and it transitions into a kind of semi-Slav for black, and it's called the Catalan system overall with what white does. Um, it starts out with pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn to c4, and pawn to e6, just getting ready to maybe move this bishop on this diagonal. If the knight were to come to c3 next, that would actually go into the Nimzo Indian defense, where the knight comes to b4, where the bishop comes to b4, pinning the knight. But we don't see that. Rather, we see pawn to g3, getting ready to fianchetto the bishop. It's good to take note that the knight could come to f3 first. It will end up on f3 in all the variations. But bringing the knight to f3 prior to this pawn to g3 actually goes into the Queen's Indian defense instead. And you could still try to incorporate the Catalan system. That is actually one of the variations where you still fianchetto in the Queen's Indian. But the Catalan system itself does not involve black fianchettoing their light squared bishop, which is what the Queen's Indian ends up doing. So bringing the pawn to g3 will keep it into the Catalan and not the Queen's Indian opening. So after this, black will play pawn to d5, just trying to contest this center. Generally, this pawn is defended by this bishop after this pawn moves to e3. But in the Catalan system, white actually gives black the chance to gain a pawn in material and goes ahead and plays bishop to g2, just getting more development, giving up the pawn for quick development on the king side, getting ready to get king safety. In the main variation of the open, which is also called the open variation, the pawn captures on c4, and now the knight comes to f3, and to hold on to this pawn, you'll see two things. Usually you'll see a6 first, and then b5 from black, but it could be the other way around, where b5 comes up and then later in the game a6 will advance. Generally a6 is just more common. After this, you'll see white castle, and you'll see the b5 move previously mentioned. And this is the Catalan Open variation, where black holds on to the material that white gave it. But it's a big deal with it that some players don't like to get into is the fact that black is severely underdeveloped compared to white. White has a knight and a bishop developed, as well as his other bishop easily able to be developed, his knight easily being able to develop, and already has king safety by being castled. So black has material advantage, but white is way ahead in development. Some players don't like to be behind in development like that so soon in the game, and so that comes into the Catalan Open variation, where black just takes the material but then gives it back to white. You'll see this in this sort of variation. Let me get back to the Catalan. There it is, bishop to g2. Black will still take in this variation. That's why it's called the open, because we're opening up some files rather than having all the pawns still present in the opening. And from here, white can immediately get the pawn back with a move such as, the knight comes to f3 first, and then the bishop comes to e7, just getting ready to develop more, get king safety by moving the king over and castling. Rather than trying to take time to hold on to this pawn, they're just going to try to keep up in development. And white can take this pawn immediately or just wait a little while. Immediately would be queen to a4, checking the king. Whether the knight or the bishop comes to block the check, the queen can just sweep over and capture the pawn to regain the material. Generally, you don't even have to do this unless you really want to get your queen involved to the center of the board and developed. That's more of an aggressive play style. If you're an aggressive player, you might want to do this variation. If you see this bishop to e7, but you don't have to do this variation if you're more of a, let's develop the minor pieces first and, worry about the queen later. Black did not try to hold on to this pawn, and moving bishop to e7 and then trying to hold on to the pawn later kind of kills the point of trying to develop and keep up in development. So if black doesn't try to hold on to the pawn, they're not going to try to hold on to the pawn at all, except for maybe if they get done developing and you have yet to take the pawn. So as long as you take the pawn within, 3 or 4 moves, you're going to get your material back. The queen move is not necessary, but it is an option to immediately secure the material. Another variation that you will see with the Catalan is the closed variation. And the bishop comes to g2. And in this variation, black's not even going to capture this pawn immediately. Black's just going to try to develop his pieces and then worry about the tension in the center of the board. So in this variation, you still see the bishop to e7 just getting ready to castle on the king side for black. And from here, again, you see knight to f3, just developing the knight, getting ready to castle. Now both sides castle, and this is the closed variation. Generally, you'll see before the pawn is captured, you'll see some more developing, maybe, like the knight coming to c6. Plenty of time to, if you really want to hold on to the material, you can just push your pawn up here, you can bring your knight here, or if you even want to, you can just capture the pawn yourself. There's lots of ways to not lose material in the closed variation. It's also worthy to note, if you want to do the open variation, get back to that, but you don't want to lose this material, you could, in fact, just capture this pawn, and afterward, black will probably capture the pawn, bringing out the queen will be met with the knight coming to c3, attacking the queen, gaining a tempo. So generally, you'll see the pawn capture, maybe the knight capture, but that's a way to maintain the material and do the Catalan after this tension is resolved first. But the main line does just let black take this material in order to gain some speed on the development of the pieces. As it was stated earlier, it's very easy to get to this spot right here. You can see that the English opening can actually transpose into this setup. The semi-Slav, where this pawn is going to come out first and then this pawn, can transpose into this variation. As well as the ready opening, this knight does end up here in every single variation, so you could technically start out with that variation and still end up in this position. So it's a pretty flexible opening. It also comes into play with the Queen's Indian, as previously mentioned. The Queen's Indians, where black is also going to fianchetto their bishop, but that is also a potential option for black to do anyway in the Catalan system, although it is not in the main line of the opening. So this is the Catalan system. Hopefully you can try it out and it'll see if you like it. It's used by a lot of grandmasters. It's been catching popularity recently, and so hopefully it'll do you some good, and I hope you got something out of the video. Thanks for watching.